Hi, y'all. This is Jeff. I am here today. Today is Monday, the 9th of March, Class 19, Week 10. Today we're going to start Intro to Numerical Analysis. This is going to be an interesting live stream because for the first few minutes, I'm actually not going to talk much. We have a bunch of people in class right now that want to work through some of the details on Lab 4 and exam corrections, and I want to actually give space for that. But I know some of you are at home watching, and I didn't want you to be confused whether or not I was alive or if we had class or whatever. So we are here. I'll probably start talking again around 10:15, 10:20. I have some announcements that I'll review in just a minute, but we are indeed here around 10:20. I will resume normal quote-unquote lectures. And between then, students that are in class right now are going to be working on some details having to do with Lab 4 and their exam correction. So see you soon. Okay. You got it open, Taylor? All right, how we doing, y'all? It's about 10:15. So another option might be, I mean, I don't know, there's some people that I definitely know are watching externally, right? So that's a little bit tough because they have kind of planned their morning around the idea that they're not physically in class right now, but they'll be physically in class in lab. But it looks like you all are pretty active at the moment. So I'm not against the idea, assuming that I don't know how I could be in contact with those people that are watching, that you could take the morning session and do lab work, and you could take the afternoon section. Like for me, it's our class, right? So there's no reason why we couldn't lecture in the afternoon and do lab in the morning.
Because the syllabus says that we have to do that.
Yeah, but this is our class though, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of open to that. Let's not make a decision right now. It's 10:15. Why don't we check back in at 10:20, all right? So that's an option if you wanted it. What's up, Art? Looking slick, brother. Did you get trimmed up a little bit? Wow. You do it yourself? I mean, it looks so good that it has like the art touch to it. What's up, Kenny? You all finished? Or another option is just let the entire day be lab. I'm not against the idea. We did. I would like to move on to numerical analysis, yeah. Let's check, let me shut up for a minute. For those of you that are watching that are not physically in the room, I wonder how I can be in contact with you. Here, why don't I do this? I'm going to sign into my email address right now, and for the next 20 minutes, you can access me on email, and I promise I'll read and respond. So it looks like the students in class right now have a lot on their mind in terms of the lab. I'm not against the idea that we spend the day today on lab. In that case, you might want to come in if that was something that you wanted, but I know that that might affect the way you were thinking about today. So let me go ahead and sign into my email, and if you want to contact me via email, you can do so in the next 20 minutes. Is there anybody sitting in this room that is 100% done with everything that's due today? Close. What type of close? Like, I think I'm close? Because that's not always close, right?
10 hours.
For the record, those of you at home, not a single person raised their hands. That's awesome. Yeah, hey, you're telling me I get to keep my job, right? Nick, I just made Nick smile and say yes. Today's a good day. Go. Real professors crush dreams? No. No, damn it. Work so hard not to be one of them. Okay, I'm on email right now. I'm going to go ahead and say it looks like we're going to have a active working day today, and I'm completely okay with that. So if you're watching somewhere local and you wanted to actually work in class with others with you, you're welcome to migrate towards class right now. I'll make an announcement in just a minute and check that that's okay with folks, but you might want to start preparing yourself for that. I think we're going to do an active, not a single, I just asked the question, is anybody done? And nobody raised their hand. So, yeah, awesome. So what I might do is just, okay, so I think we're ready to make a decision. I'm ready to make a decision now. What do you say? Should we just have an active working day today? Okay. I do have some material to lecture on, but I don't have to do that at this moment. Let's say this, at around lab time start, at around 12 p.m., we will come back in as a group and check in to see where we are. I do have some announcements for you that I want to announce because they're important, and I'll re-announce these later today. So the first draft of our final exam is in 7 days. Today I brought copies. I'm so proud of myself because I paid for all the ink and all the paper out of my own pocket. There's a copy of the Write Your Own Exam Questions assignment. It's right up here. I would like this to be due on Wednesday. I'll have more announcements on this later today when we check back in. But if you haven't grabbed a copy, please do so before you leave the room. And I hope you take this as seriously as I do. I read every one of yours. You saw the document that I created. And then hopefully I'd like to choose the questions on the final from your selection. I would love it if some of you would have fun making challenging but solvable questions with the understanding that there is something called the exam corrections process. You haven't seen me grade those yet. But I believe that the best way to learn is to make mistakes. And so I'll say that, I'll talk more about that, but feel free to write challenging questions that you feel challenged by, but that are solvable in an in-class exam environment, right? The other thing that I want to announce, I have a meeting with my boss this coming Wednesday, actually two bosses, my boss and then some higher up in the institution, and the only time those two people could meet that were convened for them was Wednesday at 1 p.m. So I will be in class all day, and then I have to leave promptly at 12:50. So no office hours, but today I am available for the entire class period. Any other questions for me before I shut up and let you all work?
Does that mean the exam will be next
The exam I'm hoping is next Monday. And then this Wednesday is the no office hour period. I believe Derek has some study sessions coming up. I'll see if I can I took a picture of those. I'll see if I can send out to the whole class when those study sessions are, so that you have access to help if you need it. And then I'm literally here all day today. Any other questions before I shut up? Okay, so at 12 p.m. we'll check in. Between now and then, please work on whatever it is that you think you need to do. I would pray that that's something to do with Engineering 11. And then I might keep streaming. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to keep streaming. I probably should write a note on the board so that people can see it. Awesome. Yep. Does that sound okay, Ethan? Art, what do you think? How fun. This is freaking awesome. bathroom anyway. So here's a question I would love to. So I've actually thought about teaching this class, the first part of it, where not only is the we'll actually do it, it's so good to show how it is. Some people say that I mean, I'm fundamentally disagreeing with this thing. Okay, so maybe put it on a separate site. Well, what you don't know is that Matlab, I don't know if you know how Matlab is integrated with Printout. You know all the projects that we do. So Matlab has an entire kind of like simulation arm that is based on buildings and houses. So, but the only way you can get into that realm is if you have that knowledge. So part of it is probably one, sharing it with the rest, but two, when it's time, if you ever want to open that public Matlab, you have that whole experience. Separate modules. But in terms of the numerical analysis, you guys approach it or not? So that provides something valuable out of and yet it's under CNC as well. Yeah. Declare int. Or double signal. It's way harder, right? You gotta know me, man. You started with 1C. Yeah, you can do it. I should have expected this. Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. Yep. Yeah.
For this lab, what are we submitting? Hard copy and soft copy?
Okay, let me finish this sentence. And send. And let me transition to you. So, and let me answer this in written format. So
Okay. Because depending on what you need or what you would like from us, it changes how I'm going to attack these problems for time constraint reasons.
Yes.
There's a lot to do.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm curious.
I'm brainstorming. So I don't want to change that. I don't think it's going to change the way you attack it.
Yeah. Because right now I'm being very lazy and trying to understand the code and cutting and pasting.
Did you say that in your lab 3? And in one of your lab 3 things, you're like, I'm lazy.
Yeah.
And then I read that and I was like, I literally wrote on it like, I've never seen you do this. I've never seen you be lazy.
Yeah.
I think maybe I would call it strategic. I would call
This
it
is
like
more
survival.
Stress survival.
Yeah, so I would never. I don't like. For me, when I hear that word and I see you,
I'm calling it lazy.
that's like calling me
because
short.
I'm not
or something.
coding this whole document from the ground up. I'm looking at your document going, what the heck is this?
Great.
How do I take something?
What are you noticing about that code? That's it's like at least
sorry.
at most a C. That in the sense that it's not well documented. It's,
Yeah.
That part
I'm
of the.
sorry, I don't like it.
Don't be.
My goal during break is to try to go back and understand it and make a better document because I'm looking through it and I haven't coded in like 3 years. So I'm looking at this document going,
Yeah, right.
like, how does this create this? And I'm looking at the Matlab and I'm like, wait, you could just use linspace, you could use this. There's so many easier things.
Yeah, well, okay, so, and this was actually part of it. So one of the things that I realized that I found out was I had made the statement out loud, like, you need to teach yourself how to code. And I had made the statement out loud, like, you need to write good code. But I never actually forced my students to feel what you're feeling right now, which is have somebody produce code for you that's supposed to do what it's doing, and then you take that code and use it. Because 2 things will happen. Number 1, the moment you use that code, you're going to realize, well, no, right? So then you have to teach yourself anyways. And then the second thing is you realize, like, that code took me something like 10 hours to produce, and yet when you look at it, it's shitty code. Right? Like, there's no documentation on, like...
The first time I ran it, I was like, oh, I could just click the button and run it. It's like, nope, you can't click the button and run. You have to do this stuff. And I'm like, okay, I import the data, I click it and run. It's not clicking and running. Why is it not working?
So I'm with you on that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk together about what to turn in. I wonder if I should do it via email. What do you think?
That might be a good idea.
Probably a good
just
idea,
so
right?
People who aren't here, who are showing up
Yep.
later, know what they need to have.
Okay, so let's, if it's okay with you, can we do this as a team?
Yeah.
And I might do it in email to myself first. Okay, so let's do Anderson, Jeff. Okay, so good morning. Below, as you may recall, we had a tentative due date for Lab 4 papers, Lab 4 reports, due today on Monday, what's today?
The 9th.
The 9th?
Yeah.
3/9/2020. Below, I'd like to list the specific items I want you to submit for this lab, both in electronic and paper form. Please read these instructions carefully as you prepare your submissions. For Lab 4, I would like the following papers submitted as hard copy documents. Physical paper copy, physical paper documents. Okay, so top page is the Lab 4 prompt. 4 pages available on the course website, right?
Mm-hmm.
Should I put a link to that thing?
I think they could find it.
Okay, all
It's
right.
under Lab 4, it's the first thing. If they couldn't find it and they couldn't find the zip
All right.
file, then I mean,
I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, you're very kind of me. Okay, second paper. Second, I guess I should call it stop document, because it's actually like multiple pieces of paper, right?
yeah.
Second document.
So here's the layout. The first thing is the functions, or the first function we're asked to create.
Right.
Is power of 2.
Yeah, so let's.
So that's a M file and a
Print
printed version of that.
out of your Matlab code that solves Lab 4 problem 2. What do you think about extending the duty in your own circumstances?
That would be appreciated because right now
Yeah.
I was very overwhelmed by this, mainly because I haven't coded in so long. And so I'm looking at this. This first part
Takes a while.
took me 6 hours to create 3 really nice, efficient lines of code that did the same thing as like half of all the stuff and then add the necessary comments so someone can understand the logic function I created. Because I was like, what the heck is a flag? I know from like
You're making me really
C#
proud.
and C++, like there are different flag values like you can throw out for true false statements like 0s and 1s, but in MATLAB they call it logical. And I spent 2 hours searching for this documentation about what the heck a logical, and so it would turn the logical statement if 1 then 0, and Marcus and I played with this for like 2 hours trying to figure out how to break it. We figured it out. So we created 3 lines of code, and that took like 8 hours.
That's right.
So it's a lot if you really go.
If you actually, if you
depth.
actually try to learn it, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
you're
so
actually
that would be helpful for you. I'm going to do some samples. I had a response to in this. Another thing that you said in your lab 4 was like you were debating whether or not it's possible to teach yourself well because that document had said like.
Yeah.
And I think one of the issues there is access to information. So one of the things that I see is one of the reasons that we don't have scientific people that are super literate is because it's not easy for somebody that's in classes getting trained to have the time that it takes to find the right information. And so a lot of times what they'll do is they'll base their learning on some professor's guide, and professors don't have any incentive to fill the gaps there. And so what ends up happening is when people teach themselves to code, it's literally in what you might call emergency mode, which is what you're feeling on this
I
one.
feel
right?
this pitfall. I
Yep.
feel where people are coming from and why there's so many issues happening in the scientific community with self-taught learners.
Yep.
Feel
Yeah,
the
so
pain.
from that standpoint, like one of the things that I want to do on my website, we'll get back to this in a second, but I didn't want to respond to that because I'm trying to create a hub of information. So in that, the reason that I wanted you to read those 5 documents is those 5 documents are what you might call representative of the larger conversation happening in the computer science community. And then one of the reasons that I chose to highlight the books that I mean, I'm not claiming that that you should read all of those books, linearalgebra.com. But what I am claiming is most scientists that teach themselves how to code don't even know where to start thinking about where to get access to good books to do that.
Yeah.
Those particular books, I spent quite some time. That's why it took so freaking long to write this lab. So here it is, this one.
Yeah.
So they're good. I'm not claiming that they're all the same, and I'm not claiming that it's a good activity to buy all of them and try to read all of them because that's like a 5-year study, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that I am claiming is I think that as computers, as teachers, one of the things that we could do is if all of us had access to these, we could actually choose a subset and then start integrating the ideas back into our classes and give specific references to students to say, hey, if you wanted to learn more about this topic, please do so. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I want to kind of demonstrate in this class and why I chose to teach it this way, because there's no way in hell that in 12 weeks I'm going to be able to get you what you need.
Yeah.
And if I set up the expectation that in fact there's no such thing as me or anybody that's going to be able to teach you, and then also get you access to resources that are kind of what you might call the best of the best, then the claim is like, instead of always thinking about coding in emergency mode, if coding is something that's interesting to you, you could be in proactive mode, right?
Yeah.
Where you like actively seek out opportunities to code on a daily basis, and then use these as a lens through which you learn that earlier in your career, so that by the time you get down up to the later stage in your career and you're starting to code for the first time as a professional, meaning part of your paycheck requires that you code, right? Then by that time you'll already have access to some of the fundamentals there. And so I agree that it is really hard, but I think one of the reasons it's really hard is that we as a community don't give access to the type of information early on in the stage, so that by the time people actually start to teach themselves, they're literally like, if I don't get this project done by March, I'm going to lose my paycheck.
Yep.
So I don't have time to learn all this tangential stuff. I literally have to, and by that time it's too late, right?
Yeah.
So I'll shut up about that. Okay, second document, print out a Matlab code that solves problem 2.
Yep.
And then we said there's 2 parts of that, right?
Yeah, there's technically
Possible script file.
3.
So lab 2 problem 2 script file. Lab 2 problem 2.
To be the you fixed 8 file.
Yeah, so 2.
There should technically be 3 files. The one for, I'm just going to call it by name, the is power of 2, the you fixed 8, and then the script file that controls all of the calls.
And which one's the script file that controls all? C. Oh, okay, that's good. I'm glad I really specifically wrote that in. Okay, lab 2 problem 2 function is power of 2 file. Lab 2 problem 2b, and I should function file for
you fixed 8 is what you commented it.
You fixed 8. And then lab 2 problem 2c function file,
the script file that controls the calls to both functions.
That controls the calls to both functions. Okay. So second document, I suppose I should call them, printout of your Matlab code that solves. Please print out each Matlab file separately and make sure I can tell which file I can easily figure out what I am looking at. Okay. I think I need to give you a pay raise right now. Okay, so now the third document.
So that's going to be the single pendulum now.
Okay, it's really interesting that this thing is not goes to 4. Then we'll do like this. There it is. Okay, so third document, third set of documents, second set of documents. Okay. Print out. Ooh, the code on that's going to be pretty long, huh?
Yeah, that's why I was wondering, because the way that I started to make the graphs off of this was I was just scissor clipping stuff and like running it, and I was like, oh, it worked. Okay, cool. We're deleting all the comments because I don't care about the comments. The goal was to get the graph, so I got the graph.
Awesome.
So like I said, I was being very, in my way, lazy.
I would not call that lazy. I would call that
0 comments.
Strategic. No, that's exactly how I start coding. That's exactly how I start coding. When I start my coding projects, first thing that I want to do is that goes to that 5th reading that we did, Greg Wilson, where he's like, get something working first before you optimize it, right?
Yeah.
And I generally, when I'm coding like that, I will write comments, but the comments are super terse, and they're literally just placeholders for myself to remember something quickly.
Yep.
Yeah, and so
that's exactly what I did. Like, there was somewhere you're like, oh, this is like x-axis. I'm like, cool, we're leaving that. Like the bare minimum for what needs to be in a graph.
Yeah, because the goal, like, I wouldn't call that lazy. I would call that, when I think about that, I call that super strategic, because what the idea is, like, I could have a bunch of comments with no working code, or I could have a bunch of working code with no comments. One of those strategies is going to get me closer to the end result that I'm looking for, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the lessons behind this that I am very, very conscious of is what I recognize is that the working code is really time expensive. And then I also recognize I spend enough time doing what you did, which is reading other people's code. Well, forget other people's code. Let me talk about the code that I've written that I haven't touched for 3 years, and then I go back and I'm like, what the? like at the time it made complete sense to me, right? Mm-hmm. But 3 years later, when I haven't touched it for a while, and then so what ends up happening is I get into this process where I'm like, listen, I'm literally talking to myself here, right? Like, if all I do is solve the problem, I'm fucked. Because what ends up happening is 3 years from now, if I ever want to go back from that, I'm not even going to understand what I do. And the problem is going to take me a ton of time. So I know that now, which means not only do I have to set aside the time to actually solve the problem that I want to solve, but I also have to set aside some extra time
to set up the framework. So if you go back and understand, okay, if I put this here, this changes that. Yeah. Instead of having to spend like hours reading through the document going,
wait, what did this do again? Why is this? Yeah, right. And that's one of those things that I think is I'm hoping that that's a powerful learning experience, or at least to get you all started on this. It's impossible to do this well in 12 weeks. Yeah. I cannot learn how to code well in 12 weeks, right? Yeah. And when I was thinking about the introduction, one of the goals that I have is to expose you to some of those general themes and to start getting you mentally prepared for that so that you can actively seek out. And so the fact that you're telling me that, in some sense, I'm very sad, because it means that we share the same psychological and emotional thing, right? And I hate to like propagate that. Uh-huh. But the flip side is at least I've been very explicit in saying that out loud, rather than like I used to think that it was me that was stupid, right? Like, rather than recognizing like this is a function of the way that our education system is set up, and if we can inoculate, or at least like get you, it's almost like giving it immunity. Like, you're going to get the sickness, but when you get it, it will be a lot less harmful because you're already kind of prepared, right? Mm-hmm. So from that standpoint, like I would counter the narrative that, in fact, when I hear the words lazy and then your name next to them, it's like hearing like water and oil. They just don't mix really, right?
I call it lazy in my head because there's a time constraint. I mean, we're in 3 weeks left in the quarter, final exam next week, and it's like, okay, where can I cut time?
Strategic. You're focused on goal-oriented action. Yeah. Okay, so third document, Printout. I actually might print out of the source code. Okay, so let's do this. Third set of documents, solutions.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Because for the first two graphs, you already provide us the script file for it. We just have to change ownership, and then like for the first one, you just run it, and then the second one for the displacement, you just change the title and the markers. We might just, if I could suggest, print these two as a confirmation that you did it.
Awesome.
Because you should be able to just see that we changed the time and the markers on the plot, and then the other one for 3BI for the plot position function, or the plot position script file. We just run it. That should be the first thing you see.
Printout of,
and then
let's see, so
with these two, we actually have to create files.
Your own files, yeah.
So these, I feel, would
these
be...
three maybe, huh?
Yeah, these three files I feel like would be beneficial to submit.
Okay.
Because you already have provided us with these two.
Okay, so then printout of plot from item 3BI.
Yeah.
Printout
so
of
print out
plot.
The graph.
Of graphical output from item 3.B.1. Okay, print out of graphical output from, I know my mom was making me laugh. I was speaking to her yesterday. She's like, why do you? Because it took me, I've already spent like 7 hours grading, and I'm only like through 7 papers for Lab 3. She's like, why do you do that to yourself? I'm like, because I think it's good for the students, but it's not good for me.
So this saves you about like 4 hours
awesome.
or more, because you've already provided us this. You just have to look at the two graphs.
Okay, so then
Okay.
those are those two items, and then
Those two.
printout of
For 3B triple I, you're gonna need
plot velocity
the velocity script file.
of
I
Because
guess it's
this
a
is-
function file, right?
Oh yeah, function file.
plot velocity function file from item 3.b triple, and then printout of graphical output also from plot velocity function file from 3.b.123.
And then the same thing
For
for
plot acceleration.
Okay. Okay, so let's plot acceleration. I always forget how to .m. I suppose I should call them .m function files, right? Yeah, the next time I teach this class, I will make sure that all of this stuff is well documented. It's just, as you can imagine, writing this lab is as hard as it took me a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can only imagine having to grade all of this.
that's why they pay the big money.
I'm just kidding.
It's true though. So that covers this, and then the last part is a solution
Printout.
for.
Oh yeah, I actually didn't say how to do this, right?
Yeah, that's also what I was going to ask because.
Yeah, so we could do a plot.
I actually forget how I did that on my own code here.
Yeah, this was the original question I had: is how did you want us to?
I'm sure I did it as a function.
Yeah.
And I might have even called it.
Yeah.
I think I called it plot
UV
UVA.
data. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's what you used.
Yeah. Printout of the function file you use to solve problem 2C, and then also print out of the actual graph, right?
3C.
3C. Print out of the function file you use to solve problem 3C. Print out of the graphical output from your solution in problem 3C. Okay. So I always forget how to. Let's. Okay, draft saved. That's good. Okay, so that would be the actual documents, hard copy, right? Mm-hmm. And then electronic copies. Please submit. So what I'll say is, for the electronic copies, I want all the actual script files and function files. Mm-hmm. Probably nothing else.
Do you want the figure? Because the figure.
Probably figures would be nice, huh? So that I can
be
confirm that the.
saved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can get the rest of that written up. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
And
you
then
so much.
The last part is the acknowledgement of how it relates to
Oh,
1A
yeah,
with
yeah,
derivatives.
right.
Is that
So-
going to be here? Should we write that on a document, or can we just put that at the bottom of one of our files? Like at the bottom of this file, can we do like 3D and then answer it in the comments, or
I'm
we
not
just-
against that idea.
because this whole part here is the analysis of everything that we did.
Yeah, literally, it's this is the start of a science paper, right?
Yeah. So can we submit it with the file like this and just put part 3D and comment out, this is what I noticed from creating the functions, or?
Is commenting on my part of it? It's sometimes hard to read that type of analysis through comments.
Okay.
What if we were to do like a printout of a type up
Okay.
With that, right? So your a printout of a typed response to
3D.
problem 3D.
Relating the knowledge to Matlab.
Analyzing your graphs and comparing these results to Math 1A knowledge. All right, great. And then I will type up right now, and I'll also put the link. It's the same drop-off link we used previously. And then I'll send that out.
Got it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natalie.
No, this helps me.
What'd you learn in terms of the conversation that we had?
That I'm doing okay. I'm not a failure because I struggled to read the whole document of code and I'm just snippeting stuff.
Yeah, I'm a failure.
Last Wednesday, I sat down and I had to leave. I told Marcus, I was like, I'm gone. Like, I went to the STEM center and I was like, I'm not understanding this thing. So then Scott took me over to, or no, not Scott, Mike took me over to the computer area, but none of them could help me understand this. No one looked up like the documentation, and I was like, really? You guys can code in like 6 different languages, but you can't help me understand how to convert something from C++ to here? Like,
It's really humbling, right? And exciting from some standpoint, right?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And Mike was like, if you really master this is going to be great if you go to a different university because they really love this stuff. And I go, we should definitely have someone here. Because, like, I worked with them to help me kind of understand how to create the function. So that's how I learned about the different flag values, because that happens in different languages and the logic statements. But they didn't know how it was in Matlab. So I had to spend 2 hours translating what the heck they said in C++ to syntax in Matlab, and it was like, okay, it's logical. That's what it is. So painful.
You're doing absolutely wonderful.
Painful but fun. Very rewarding. Just a lot to do in a week.
2 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Sorry.
It's fun.
Well, you're surviving, and that feeling that you're having, like the fact that you're in it and you're asking those questions, I share that feeling. So if I were to open my heart, we could have a cup of coffee over that pain, right? And that's part of, for me, mentally preparing for and planning to engage in that type of learning and actually seek it out. This is one of the things that I think is really interesting about our education system. We don't do a very good job of making sure that that experience is an integral part of our system. And so what ends up happening is we put the burden on the student. And normally in an undergraduate career, students that don't know that this is something they should be doing don't actively seek it out. And it's not until they get into a position where they're now having to do this, but by that time it's too late because they're under crunch time, right? And they didn't realize, like, this, I should be preparing for this, right? And so I agree with you that the best way to do this is actually to reverse engineer the system and get a large number of professors who are really well equipped to be able to integrate that in. But what that requires is system transformation, and that's really slow. You're in a different phase of your education, which is system navigation, right? So from that standpoint, like, one of the things that I would really encourage, and hopefully we can stay connected, you have access to my online site, right? So you'll have that always, which is, if we can have you start thinking about how to design that, eventually I believe, and this was true for me, and I think it can be true for you, and it can be true for anybody that decides this, if you actively seek these out, regardless of or in spite of the institutional paradigm, because the institution is actually, most institutions feel less stress when they help you avoid this, because then they don't have to change anything, right? They don't have to change their courses, they don't have to spend, right? But what ends up happening is, at the end of the day, that it actually makes me, if I fall into that paradigm, fall into that trap, I'm actually less effective over the long run of my career, because that whole skill set I've never actually developed, right? Whereas if on the flip side, if I make an active dedication, in fact, you're actually watching that active, it's a different standpoint, right? My active dedication is the education piece, but to build in opportunities to work on this type of stuff, and then if I remember, like, how hard this is, right, and what it actually takes, then I can get some of the knowledge that I need out of it, regardless of whether or not the institution is ready for that. Right? And in the short run, it's much harder, and there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of suffering. But the hope is, if I do it strategically, and I have a lot of faith in you in this way, because I think you work really strategically and you're really, really savvy in this way, right? That eventually, over time, you'll be able to leverage that to create options that would not have been on the table otherwise, right? With that said, I cheers you, and I shed a tear with you, right? 'Cause yes. And it's my fault, right? Like ultimately this is me.
It's okay. It's a step in the process.
You're doing it.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of the work that you're doing, Natalie.
Question is I have a question with my displacement plot, and this says this.
What's going on?
This is my code for displacement,
Okay.
and it says modify function or something.
Oh, variable x.
X is different.
Oh, so you got to be a little careful, right? Because in this case, you're passing a variable over here. So let's go back into this. Let's go up. So here, what's the name of this thing? That variable right there.
Period.
The one before that.
The displacement.
So like what's interesting about this is you're right to say that I guess I could actually lecture on this here because this is a great question. So you have, what do we call this? Problem 3 code. The question that you asked, so Jin Wen just asked this beautiful question. She's getting an error that says that, can I show that error on screen? So she's got, yeah. So she's getting this error. So she has this code over here where she's using a plot displacement function and Matlab. So when she goes to plot this thing, there it is, right? So it looks like you're using U properly. So let's see, line 59. Yeah, so let me finish. I have a quick update. So the question that you're asking right now has to do something called variable scope. So this is a computer science concept. Okay, so you've got this, what you might call problem 3 script file, right?
And the problem3 script file is the thing that kind of drives the entire object, right? And then that problem3 script file calls a few different function files. So the one that you're talking about right now is the plot displacement function. Okay, so what's really interesting about that is when you set the variable x equals something in your script file, this thing actually gets written to the workspace,
Yeah.
right? So you're right to say that that workspace includes the variable x, but what's really interesting about the plot displacement function is that the plot displacement function doesn't have access to the entire workspace. It only has access, unless you so there's something called a global variable. If you specifically define a variable that is global, then the function may be able to access that. In MATLAB, that is true. In fact, you can search on the documentation later, not today, finish your stuff first, about global versus local variables. There's some really good introduction to that. But formally speaking, when you call this plot displacement function, you gave it like t, you gave it d, and you gave it period. So what's interesting about that is the only thing this thing gets access to are these variables, right?
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is when you go to refer to x in that, this plot displacement function, it's outside the scope of variables that this thing has access to, because this thing was defined in the workspace. The function itself doesn't have access to the workspace. It only has access to what you pass into it. So from that standpoint, when you're defining stuff within the function file, you have to be aware that the only thing that the function has is what you've specifically passed into it. And the reason that that's useful is sometimes when you, and the same thing is true, if you manipulate data inside of your function, that data manipulation doesn't get transformed to the workspace itself. It only gets within the function. As soon as the function's done running, all those losses are changed, and the only thing that gets tracked is the output.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, so when you're looking at that error, the reason that error happens is because you haven't specifically put that value into the function. So one way to solve it is to pass a value of x in so you can refer to it. The other way to solve it is avoid mentioning x and see if you can solve the problem by just using the displacement variable d.
So will I have to like enter these two lines?
It depends on what is it like. So I'm not sure where are you. So like let's go back to your error. Okay, so like you actually don't need this, right? If you like, I don't know where your where's your script file that actually calls that thing. Okay, so like the moment you've passed that value u in, you already have access to it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, so like you don't have to redefine that. So like you don't actually need this because this thing is already done for you, right? So in particular, if you now go ahead and run it, so let's save that and then run it. Okay, let's go back to 83. Okay, so you got to be a little careful because here you call this thing D, right? Yeah, so you got to play with that. Right? You have to play with it. Yeah. But that solves that problem. Okay, wait. What did you just learn? And you can use some new words if you want.
Variable scope.
Okay, you got to tell me more than that.
Okay, so something like is entered in the workspace will not be able to enter by something like the function.
In the function file.
Yeah.
So in particular, function files only have access
to the variable.
that you specifically act as input.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can learn more about this subject by reading about variable scope in Matlab. If you would like, in fact, we can go right now. Type in global variable.
Okay. So I'm going to let you can read through that, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then share data between workspaces. There's a nice introduction to that, right? And the reason, so I did just help you with this, right? And we have talked about it. But the reason that I want to show you this is that it's not that I, like, so in fact, I want to teach you this. But what I want to do is that set the expectation that part of the coding process requires self-teaching and the ability to troubleshoot, and that is actually quite expensive. Like, the amount of time that takes is quite high, right?
Got it.
Because if I don't set that up, you might expect anytime I have a hard problem, I'm just going to go to some expert and they're going to teach me, right? But eventually that's going to break down. And so what we're doing is we're building up stamina, troubleshooting stamina, and then also specific reference on how to start getting access to the type of information that you need, irrespective, irregardless of what type of expert you have access to. How'd I do today? Solid C? I get to keep my job. Yeah, I say solid C, really. When I have all my stuff up online for free with really high quality videos, all my stuff written, that will be a B-. The day you make your first $100,000 of this, that's what I call it. Right?
Got it.
Yeah.
Is it possible to ask for an extension?
How many of you would continue working really hard today if you knew that this was due on Wednesday? How many of you would like it to be due on Wednesday? Okay. How many of you would really be upset if I said you have the option of submitting it today, but you also have the option of submitting it on Wednesday? Okay. So you, if you would really like to, you could submit it today. It looks like we're going to have an active working day all day. So the reason that I didn't want to give you the extension at the beginning of the class is that some of you might say, like, oh, I have other stuff on my mind. I'm not going to work on it all day. And I think, do you remember me saying last Monday when we started this lab, you should definitely start on this today because this is really hard? Yeah. So let's say you have the option of submitting this on Wednesday by the end of class, which is going to be 10:50. I have to leave sharp at 10:50. It's 12:50 because I have a meeting off campus on Wednesday. Today I'm here till 1:50. So, and then the other thing is I was going to lecture today, but to be honest with you, I see some really good Matlab going on right now. Much better than anything that I can do in lecture. So we'll lecture on Wednesday. So you literally have 4 hours of working time from the start of class. So those of you that are watching at home, I will make some announcements later today, so don't leave. I have some stuff to say. Keep working. Did that solve that problem? Jinwen and Natalie sponsor that, and they say that they accept cash, credit, or check for changing the due date, right? That's not funny, Jeff. Yeah? Can help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Art. Just getting introduced. What's up, Michelle?
So, originally I tried doing my music and tried doing it
Did it work? Do you know why?
well, I couldn't figure out a way to wrap it up. That's beside the point. I'm going to chop it off, but I do want to figure out the way for it.
You might try sealing. Try the sealing button. So go down to the, or you can go down here to sealing. Try floor. That's easier. And then just go down to the access. Yeah, we're gonna do that one and then go down to the yeah. Because what happened is you can use shift, so you can shift it. I'll let you play with that. That's one option. I'll let you play with these. So that's one way to do it. The thing that I would do is I would call back the memory of the fifth reading, like I didn't realize I was reading the stuff yesterday and over the weekend, and I didn't realize I didn't write up a so it's amazing what happened then. You stress some of his small stuff. Part that says get it working before optimize. Optimize software.
Well, yeah, and it can work, it works fine, I commented on the parts of it, so now I'm just jumping off it.
So what I would say, like, the reason I say this is definitely something that I went to, but I had a solution that I really wanted to work with. So the thing that the dedication that I would suggest is dedicate to yourself, everything else in the lab gets submit the lab, and then, but everything, yeah. Yeah, right. And then after that, you get to go back. So does that mean you're almost done?
If it's strong, then I'm done for one round.
So in that case, then you probably need some stuff to do.
I was gonna, my exam corrections are done, kind of.
Oh, okay. You have some. Okay.
I have stuff in there.
You have some stuff.
Don't worry.
You sure? Because I got.
I need to also study for this final.
The Harry Potter stuff. Yeah, you can run off the solar.
Hey,
How's it going?
it's going well.
How are you doing? Stuff.
I'm just Natalie had this beautiful suggestion that I write an email with everything that I'm expecting for both a hard copy and an electronic copy in
Gotcha.
very detailed form, and so I'm working on that email.
Yeah.
How can I help you?
I just wanted to say, like, blame myself for not being able to submit today because
Oh,
it's,
that's okay.
I started on the candy before I finished. I was like really into the making the number classes, so I made a representation of a float.
That's awesome.
And using like I built it on top
That's
of the
really
fix.
exciting.
So essentially, like you get your integer values, and then you just like say I'm gonna, because I did it so you can have like a variable. So here I'm storing the integer of the exponent biased, and 8 bits in the leading, or 8 bits total, 8 in the leading part. So essentially an integer, and then this is 23 bits total, 0 in the leading
so-
part. So it's, yeah. And I tested it with like a few different. I haven't done the conditional where if you have the 0, what's that specific condition again? It's where the exponent is.
Oh, yeah, for the subnormals
It's, you don't.
and the-
Yeah, it's
yeah,
subnormal.
yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to go back over that, but
That's really exciting.
yeah, it's really cool. Do you know if there's? Because I'm using unit 8. I'm using 8 bits for every bit, essentially. Do you know if there's a way to use 1 bit for every bit?
I'm not understanding 1 bit for every bit.
So essentially, I have this array that's here. If I go,
Oh, you're saying that each of these things is stored as an int 8 or something like that?
yeah,
You could do it as a logical.
would that still use a bit?
I don't. Oh, you're saying like.
All right, so would it still use a byte for a logical?
I don't know how MATLAB does that.
Because
That's a
when
very
you
good question.
using I imagine addresses are by bytes, not by individual.
if you're
bits.
lucky, right?
Like, and you
Because-
have 8 variables.
Yeah,
in
so
a
I
single
so it's
byte.
well the crazy thing about this I think this is probably a 64-bit operating system. I think this might be 32 or 64. So I actually don't know. This has been an open question of mine. The way that MATLAB interacts with the operating system interacts with the memory structure to actually store individual characters.
Yeah.
I would highly, or individual values, I would highly doubt that even in int 8, that is 8 bits. Like, in fact, I think that on top of every one of MATLAB's single variable is probably a bunch. You could think about each one of them as a data structure that costs, like for one matrix, for example, there's like kilobytes of information that we don't necessarily see on our side of it.
Gotcha. Yeah, because when you have the int 8, it's not just 8 bits.
Yeah.
There's the interpretation. What's telling you to interpret that as an int 8.
And we don't see that on our
and
end of it. right?
where's the address?
Where's
and
the
what's
address,
name
what's-
of the
yeah,
variable?
exactly.
And these are all things. That's probably like 10 times as much memory that's
Yeah.
actually dedicated to storing the number,
Yep.
just the information surrounding that data.
Yeah. And that's stuff that I actually, there's a part of me that gets really frustrated because I am sure that information exists somewhere. Whether or not that information is only in the brains of the people at MATLAB or if there's
Yeah.
documentation is an open question of mine because I spent more than a few hours of my life trying to track down this exact information. Like what's happening exactly with the data structures and what does MATLAB do internally and what does it give us access to?
Yeah.
My gut feeling, and I haven't found good answers to that, and eventually I moved on with my life because I had other stuff to do, but this is one of the reasons that I think, like I actually didn't, as a younger person, take the MATLAB online community as seriously as I should have. And getting ready to teach this class again, there's like hundreds of questions that I had when I was younger that I never got answers to, and then I never actually spent the time to post them online.
It's just, you can dedicate any amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, this is people get. Yeah, the reason I wanted to show you that guy Yair Altman was because that guy's
Yeah.
whole career, people will fly him all over the nation or the world to bring him in as a consultant on MATLAB projects, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but what that tells me though is like answers to these questions are really important, and it may be that if I were to post that on an online forum, the MATLAB coders are like, we don't give us the proprietary information.
Yeah.
But it may be that there actually is a good written resource, and I just haven't found it yet, right?
Yeah, that would be interesting if they had a data type where you can write to individual bits, like just for testing with that sort of thing, if you get what I mean.
Oh, I get exactly what you mean, because the
Yeah.
really interesting thing about that is that if you could control, and I think part of this has to do with the way that MATLAB interacts with individual architectures.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about this is that type of specificity normally is architecture dependent, right? So like the ability to, like you're going to go specifically to one bit in your memory system.
Yes.
The way in which you do that depends on what,
Yeah.
on the hardware that's implemented, and then the way that your operating system.
How it's all structured.
Right. And I think one of the things that is really interesting one of the things that I haven't really talked about that theme in Matlab discourse at least, but the whole idea of IEEE, before IEEE, you would have coders working in Manchester, England, and they would spend all this time coding on a specific machine that they themselves designed, and then they would port their code to Silicon Valley.
Transferable.
And it's not transferable because the entire architecture in the new space
Yes.
was different, right? And so one of the things that they realized is that this was causing catastrophic error across the industry, because you had these entire teams of scientists that were working in a space that needed to share stuff with other teams of scientists who were working in a different space. And when they would go to share it, they didn't even know what their bugs were, because even though verbally they had an understanding of what the architecture, the actual on-the-ground
Just
implementation.
all the algorithms that it's built on top of are just dysfunctional.
Dysfunctional, and it
Yeah.
means you have to, literally like years of coding would have to be redone from the ground up on a new architecture. And this was happening from the 1950s through the 1980s. And
Yeah.
I think Kahan in the late 1970s or mid 1970s probably thought to himself, this is fucking stupid. And so he went on a crusade. It's literally like this. I mean, let's not compare those. The civil rights is like a social issue that actually affects people's lives. This is a privilege issue that affects privileged coders that get paid well to do what they do. But it's still like that movement in computer programming was a major movement in the sense that it took a ton of energy to convince manufacturers that that everybody has to have the same standards, so that if you port numerical codes from one computer to another computer, regardless of the on-the-ground electronic implementation, the codes will work the same. And that is what IEEE 754 did. They got Intel to buy into, they got manufacturers all over the world to buy into it, and the moment that the big kingpins fell into it, it became an industry standard, so that when you had this issue of implementing these things on different computers,
Yeah.
you could write code in Manchester, I could write code in California, and we could exchange our code, and we would be sure that the output we were
Yeah,
getting
it's
the same,
really spectacular.
regardless of whether or not, regardless of how the actual thing was implemented. Yeah, right. And so and what's interesting about that realization is, I think that the people at Matlab, certainly Cleve Muller in his early versions, but since that time, they're a business, right? So
Yes.
they have to be. They want their code. They want their Matlab environment to work on any environment, on any operating system and architecture.
So they have to make a bunch of different algorithms for Mac OS, for
Yeah.
Linux, so compensating for all the different
methodologies for the operating system,
Yeah.
and then the operating system is really the one in charge of
Yeah.
going down to the guts of the computer and making sure that when somebody calls the computer to do this, that it
It
implements
has all
that
the appropriate information.
based on the particular architecture that's
Yeah.
withheld, right, or withheld in that particular thing. And so from that standpoint, like, and this is one of the reasons that when I think about the introduction to coding, like this is something that I'm currently still working on, the ability to understand what's happening in the guts of the computer, because it matters. It doesn't matter in the large stages when you're doing stuff in
Yeah,
broad.
when you're just trying to write code to do cool stuff.
Yeah, right. But when you're getting into concepts of code optimization,
Yeah.
and parallelization, and
Troubleshooting, especially.
yeah, and the higher you go, and I agree. There were some people. It might have been you actually. Forget who was writing this in their Lab 3 write-up that was saying like it's actually impossible for all scientists to be trained. It might have been Josh as well. I forget who was writing this. You can't have all scientists also have computer science degrees to the point where they could do their own computer.
Yeah.
But I think that is not necessarily true. So one of the things that's really interesting about this is that the design is a space of privilege, right? If you have access to all this information, generally what happens, like this is where learning really, if we were to do this well, we would document the highly nonlinear process of development. If we as a team spent a year studying computer history, right, we
Yeah.
would see so many failures from the 1945.
Definitely.
that ended up spurring new developments that ended up getting incorporated that are currently running. And so what happens in that space is that over a long period of time, the electrical engineers and computer scientists that are designing these machines accrue a very, very large set of wisdom
Yeah.
that if they were willing to, if they had the incentive to spend some time putting together, the economics aren't there basically. Like many of them make a living on either the cutting edge of right, like making the cutting edge machines, right? Or if they're in academia, their primary focus is not necessarily developing resources for the layperson, right?
Yeah.
Because the idea is like if you're really interested in this thing, you have to go through these courses to get there, right? And so what ends up happening is that information is kind of caught on an island that only has one bridge,
Yeah.
and right now the bridge is computer science.
Yeah, well, my takeaway from the articles wasn't that like all scientists need to be computer scientists. It's like if you're gonna write your own code, my takeaway is if you're gonna write your own code that's gonna be used for published research, document it and rigorously test it. Because experiments in real life, it's like it's gonna be reliable results depending on your measurement methods. But in a computer, if the coding's flawed, then you can't publish an article based on it. It needs to be reliable.
Well, it's funny though that they have, right?
They have.
Yeah. But
Which is an issue.
It's an issue, yeah. But this is one of the things that I would like to push as a reimagination, because I actually like to challenge that narrative that not all scientists can be computer scientists. I just think in this sense we haven't really caught up in that sense. Like the math curriculum that we have is still stuck in the 1960s Cold War arms race, right? So we're teaching logs and we're teaching hand analysis because when we were in that race, we didn't have computers, right? So almost all of the curriculum that we've developed is really designed for a reality where we don't have access, that the standard person doesn't have access to this, right? And the same thing is true for most science classes, right? That most of the people teaching the science classes were taught by people who were stuck in that.
Yeah, one of the most unintuitive notations for me is the separation between logarithms, exponentiation, and roots.
Yeah.
How it's literally all the same exact thing that we learn about it. Like,
As if they're
here's
different.
exponents. Da-da-da-da-da. It's like, okay, that makes sense. And here's a root. It's like, whoa, this is a whole new concept. And then you get into logarithms. It's like, okay, I don't even know what's going on. But it's exactly what you've learned before. It's like,
Yeah.
it's just rearranging the inputs and outputs.
And from that standpoint, like I think that we would do well as an entire learning community if we reimagined those introductions to include explorations on computers, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that it is impossible to be able to get students. I mean, this requires an entire reimagination of the college education process and the high school education process and how we measure
Needs to be
outcomes.
done.
Yeah, it does. It really does, right?
It really does.
I believe. The downside, one of the reasons that I really want to be in this class is because that process of navigation is going to take, system transformation is going to take 50 years. You're not going to be in school for the next 50 years. You're
Yeah.
So while we're figuring our stuff out, there's people that need actual information.
Yeah, I really believe in independent learning and the Socratic method versus just lecturing, which can be done online.
Yeah.
Like any value that you get from lecturing, you can get from watching a video. Why spend the time when you're all here together
I'm
with
right
the
with you.
same motive,
Yep.
just absorbing information?
Yeah,
or
and this-
not observing.
Well, not me, not if I had. Yeah, and this part of that is like one of the things that's really tough as a teacher is that our system is constructed in such a way that I have literally like I'm about face to face with students about 25 hours a week.
Yeah, there's
right?
a certain expectation of you that.
Yeah, and I'm going to get there. It's going to take me a while, but I'm right with you. Like, yes,
Yeah, it's a flawed system.
yeah, which is fun, right? Because that means it's painful. It's emotionally painful, but in the sense that like when there are problems. And we see those problems, and we're conscious of those problems, and we're willing to put names to them, and we're willing to talk about their impact. It immediately suggests ways to change, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so the short answer to your question is, that is an open question of mine. If I was in your shoes, when I was in your shoes, this same question I've had years ago. At that time, I did not take myself seriously as an active member of the Matlab community because I had other things on my mind and I didn't have any. If I was in your shoes now, and in fact I would really like to, I have like 4 other things on my mind right now, but one thing that you could do as part of this lab is actually post a question on the Matlab forum about this exact topic.
Yeah.
Like, I would love to see that. It's been something that I've actually never posted a question on that. It's a goal of mine. It's just that I always, between doing that and doing
Yeah,
other stuff
because
in
that would
class.
be really useful for writing all sorts of
Yeah.
your own classes, because
How does MATLAB, what specifically when I'm looking at, and I have looked up, there's a pretty, I would give it a solid, F plus explanation, meaning that it didn't answer the question that I wanted, but it had information. So there's a good online, I've spent time searching for what MATLAB does to encode arrays, numerical arrays. And there's a decent introduction to the memory overhead for arrays. And I remember they said some number of kilobytes. They didn't say what was stored in the kilobytes. They didn't say the exact data structure. They didn't say how they, right? But they just at
not
least
the specifics. That
they,
you
yeah,
wanted.
I want the whole thing, right? I
Right.
want them to open the freaking thing and let me look at each individual part,
Yeah.
right? Even though that's going to be an overwhelming amount of information, I don't care. Let me, but of
Let me
course,
at least see it.
yeah. But that's not their goal, right? Their goal is not let me be as transparent as possible,
Abstract it.
and they have a bottom line, right?
Yeah.
One thing that's really interesting is I haven't thought about this yet because I haven't got serious about it, but they have an open source version of MATLAB, which is Octave, Octave, Octave. And I think the people that code Octave are good at what they do, and if it's open source,
You can look under the hood.
you would imagine, right? I don't know how that's a whole.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of technology.
But that would be
Yeah.
one way. I'm not saying that the way that the Octave coders do it is the same way that the MathWorks people do it. But I am saying that if the Octave people have done this in a way to replicate MATLAB, but in a free version, they've had to wrestle with some of these ideas. And if I literally got exposed to the Octave idea about 2 years ago, whereas I started playing with MATLAB in 2008.
Yeah.
So the amount of time that I've had to think about Octave and build up those structures is very low. But when I think about this problem and I think about that is a source of information that doesn't give you access to what MATLAB is doing, but gives you a replication
Yeah.
of that and at least some structure of the understanding.
Because in
of
order
it.
to build that, I had to have the data classes of flow to
Yeah.
make the flow happen, and seeing how that's done without any of that infrastructure, just building it on top of machine language
Yep.
versus building it on top of MATLAB,
Yep.
which is a lot easier.
Yeah, it's a different problem.
But,
Yeah.
yeah, it seems useful for coding all sorts of classes to not use 8 times as much as information is necessary.
Yeah, well, and this is, I actually would say this is actually a very interesting theme in MATLAB. I would actually call MATLAB a prototyping language rather than a optimization language. So
Very true.
it goes into the 5th, and this is part of what the MATLAB people would say. If you're getting that granular,
Why don't you go use...
you should use C or
Yeah.
some other lower level language. MATLAB is really designed for prototyping, and
Yeah.
it's allow you. The whole purpose of MATLAB is to avoid that level of granularity, so that you're not getting bogged down by those technical details, and you can focus on the higher order stuff. Because what we really the computer is just a tool that you use to get some meaningful output. If we can, it really reminds me of that 5th thing where he's like, it is shown that on average people write the same number of code in the same amount of time, right? So if you have a language that requires 50 lines of code to do one thing versus a language that requires 1 line of code to do that same thing,
Yeah.
the 1 line of code is way more optimal because 1 line costs 1 line regardless of whether or not you're doing it in the higher order or the lower order, right?
Yeah, because there's still the compiling of it, and
Yeah.
pretty much translates to the same thing.
Yeah, and so from that standpoint, I could definitely understand that the pushback on that is, well, MATLAB is really a prototyping language anyways. If you want to get this granular, you really should, there's some other sphere on this. And I agree with that. I'm not
I'm not against the idea that we use MATLAB to prototype stuff.
But like hypothetically, if you wanted to run analysis on a data set using Matlab and you wanted to like use a class that could fit in 1 byte instead of having to use however many, because you're running like millions of computations. I don't know, there's certain situations where I'm sure there's like...
It would be nice to have access to that information.
Yeah.
Even if the answer is no, right? Even if like having a clear no, that's not possible, or having a clear yes, and having access to the overhead on each numeric data type, or each data class in general, right? Like what's going on behind the scene. Having access to that information, I don't think that that's hurtful. It can be if people get lost in its cycle, right? But you could just ignore it and pretend it's not there, right?
Yeah.
So I would encourage you, and if you wanted to show me, we could, I don't know, extra credit, I don't know, we post that question. Like, come up with a really good question on that, and do it after you're finished with your lab. And
another thing that's requires, I don't know if you saw on my lab 3, the bit permutation script I did. It was basically where I map out all the bits for like any number of bits you input, and then it gives you the outputs for unsigned and signed respectively. So something I was kind of beating myself up over to represent the integer values, I needed like int 32 because it wasn't capable of doing any more than 24 bits because it just maxed out the number of permutations. Like, nope, I'm not going to do that. So I had to use int32 for like millions of numbers that it's computing, even in the 0-1 part. So I'm using 32 bits to represent 1 bit. And I feel like that's limiting the capacity of the program because I can't run as many bit permutations because it's requiring much more memory for each one.
Yeah.
It's just like that specific situation where I'm running millions of computation, and for each of those I'm using like many bytes versus just a couple. Yeah.
Welcome. This is an exciting space.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
We're doing that outside of Matlab. It's nice to have just the matrix notation being able to do like this versus times 2 versus going 4 for each term.
That's the idea of vectorized.
And store it back in. It's just like one line of code.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, there's more history on this that in the 1990s, right now we're in communication avoiding because you have multi-cores, but like in the 90s, the 80s and 90s, they did this parallel processing, pipelining. You know about this?
Yeah.
So what's really interesting is that the ability to vectorize code actually is implemented. They've spent years, tens if not hundreds of work years, designing hardware that allows that to be done en masse, like a Model T, like the assembly lines, where you're, at one particular time you're doing like 10 or 15 cars, right? The same thing is true with these calculations, that deep in the heart of the floating point units, they'll actually vectorize code so that you can run 15 multiplications at the same time.
So it's not just more efficient for the coder, it's more efficient
for the actual hardware.
It's all built around matrix operations.
This is one of the reasons that I call linear algebra the love of my mathematical life.
Because it's
literally the currency of floating point operations.
For a second.
Linear algebra operations, vectorized and matrices-based operations, are to a scientific computation specialist as water is to a fish.
Absolutely necessary.
Depending on what, like, there are people that would argue with this, and like in Mathematica they do symbolic manipulation, and I understand that, right? But if you're working on partial differential equations that are unsolvable analytically, literally one of the only options that I would have if I was doing that is to discretize,
Yeah.
and then run that discretization through some numerical scheme, which maps back into vectorized code, which
The
map back
Google algorithm you talked about at the beginning of the quarter, where it's doing billions of operations, and
yeah, that
how
gets
long
in
does it take to run every time they do it? Like hours on computers.
months. It probably takes a month of, and the people that design
Just
that
like-
literally designed.
Run.
Yeah, and like a month later, they come up with a new page rank, and then they rerun it, and then they come up with a new one. And the computers, I would imagine they hired some of the best computer scientists in the world to design a supercomputer for the purpose of only doing
Yeah.
page rank.
That's a salary and a half.
That's like, they probably got paid a lot of money for that, because
Yeah.
that's their bread and butter, right? They probably, to be honest with you, the first step of this they would have done in Matlab or
That's what
something
makes
like
Google
Matlab.
Google is like what pops up when you search.
Exactly, right. That is
Different
their.
from any other browser. It's like just what pops up when you type a certain set of characters in. That's all the browser. That's all the browsers distinguish
Literally,
themselves
yeah.
with.
So like in that standpoint, the early phases of this, they probably did in MATLAB to check, like, is the idea that we're having, we can't do it on the whole web. I don't know if they did in MATLAB, and they probably didn't. They were probably
I
computer
mean, I'm
science.
sure they probably started testing base case. Like, if I have 3 search results on
Yeah,
the entire
exactly,
web,
exactly.
and I can only type in one
Yeah,
character,
yeah,
like,
right.
how can I?
Right. And that's that the testing phase of that process, not the optimization phase,
Yeah.
not the growth phase, but like the testing phase. That's really what MATLAB is designed for. Like, you have some test, you don't want to pay billions of dollars to like implement the test because you're not sure if it's going to work. So you spend some
Yeah.
relatively inexpensive, a few years, maybe a few months of work time to test it out, see what's going on.
Yeah.
Once you have a prototype, you say to yourself, okay, we have a reasonable idea, this is what we expect.
Before you build the supercomputer.
Yeah, then you turn on the switch of being like, okay, we want to bring in the big money because here's what our results. We think we can make a lot out of this, and that's where you bring, the big money comes, and then the big engineers come, and then the big projects happen, and you never know, but the hope is that whatever you build actually,
Yeah.
right?
And then it changes how information is transferred throughout the whole world.
Yeah. So that in that particular case, but the same thing's true in Boeing, right? Like when they were designing planes, they did the same thing,
Yeah.
right?
It's not like, let's build a 747 after our first prototype. Like, it's a process. Yeah, like coding that float 32, like it would be as easy as copy paste, change some numbers to how float 64, 120. Like, yeah. It's one thing nice about like problem solving, like
Once
coding
you-
and problem solving in general is like, this is a really hard problem. Let me just make it easier, and then work from there.
Yep.
Yeah. Three blue, one brown.
Yeah. I've never met him, but I'd like to meet him at some
But
point.
I think it was him. He did like a problem-solving video. It was like this extremely hard test. The hardest question, like the final question, it was like, if you have 4 randomized points on a sphere and it forms a tetrahedron, what's the average volume of that tetrahedron? And he just breaks it down like in a perfect way. And it's like, well, if you have a circle with 3 random points and it makes a triangle, and you and you fix one of the points and let the other 2 go because it's all relative, and like just built it on top of each other. It was just the most elegant solution to the hardest problem, just from starting at a base case and building up from it. Which is
Fun.
one of the most coolest thing in math is just
Oh my
figuring
God,
out
it's
like
so
a ridiculously hard problem, just and having that comprehension from the ground up. But, yeah.
Great questions. If you do post that online, show me.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop live streaming in just a bit. I wanted to make some announcements for you today, and then we will move on. I have an email that I'm about to send out with the specific things that I'm asking. I've been working on it, but people have been asking questions, which is beautiful. So I'll send that out with a very, very detailed update on what I am expecting exactly for Lab 4. The update is that Lab 4 can be submitted today, or it can be submitted on Wednesday. We had a number of people that were really hoping for some more time on that. For the rest of today, we're going to be finishing Lab 4. If you've already finished Lab 4? No? Okay, great. So is there anybody that needs more work from me? I have more work to give. Okay. if you need more work, if you're like sitting around and you're like, I have nothing to do with my life and I need more work before today ends, you just come talk with me. I have plenty of work. I don't know which pocket I'm going to take it out of. Our final exam, or you might call it exam 2, I would like to give the first draft of that in 7 days from today, which is on Monday the 16th. I have a copy of the Write Your Own Exam questions up here. I would like that to be completed by Wednesday of this week, by 1 p.m. I take that assignment very seriously, and I ask you to do the same. I really like the idea that you all are thinking critically about the material that you're learning, and that you're thinking about what do I value in this class? How do I want to be assessed? And that you're learning to write your own questions that test you deeply. I think that skill is very valuable. It's not usually a lower division skill. That's usually a graduate level skill. But I think it's never too early to start that. So please grab a copy of the Write Your Own Exam assignment. That thing is due this coming Wednesday by the time I leave at 1 p.m. Once again, I have no office hours this Wednesday from 1 to 2 because I canceled those. Specifically, I have an appointment with some of the higher ups in the college on that day. Is there anything else you need to know from me before I sign off on live stream for today and then you all keep working? Questions or concerns or comments? Probably a ton. Feel free to come ask if you need. Welcome, y'all. Looks like today I get to keep my job. Because this is hard, right? Yeah. Good job. Interesting. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to sign off on live stream, and then I'll send you email with all the detailed information about what I expect for lab 4 submissions.